everyone. I'm Caitlin McKenna. I'm an editor at Random House. Let me echo Carol and Allison, thank you. I'm here to introduce our second novelist, Sam Graham-Felsen, curly-haired man right there. So when I first read Green, Sam's book, my immediate response was want to send it to all my former classmates at Betsy Ross Middle School in New Haven, Connecticut. I wanted to go to them and I wanted to say, look, this is me, this is us, this is our story in a novel. And my urge to share it, I think, speaks to what a special coming-of-age story it is. It captures the way that so many of us feel like outsiders at 13, and the way that some of us really are outsiders at 13. Helen MacDonald, the author of H's for Hawk, wrote, "Green is a fierce and brilliant book, comic, poignant, perfectly observed, and blazing with all the urgent fears and longings of adolescence. It absolutely knocked me out." At the same time, Green really transcends its middle school setting. Heidi Julavit says, "Green is a coming-of-age story not only of a boy, but of our country, showing us the messy adolescence of a person and a culture grappling with difference and injustice." Sam's going to tell you a lot more about the book, but I'm so excited to finally be able to share this exuberant, original, page-turning novel. Sam Graham-Felsen.
Hi, everybody. So I was going to get a haircut this week, but I decided to look more like the guy on the cover of my book and leave it au naturel. Richard Ford was one of my MFA professors at Columbia, and he told me something that I never forgot. He said, write about the most important things you know about. So Green is my first book, and in it I tried to write about the ideas that are most important to me, which are race, inequality, and the American dream. These themes matter to me for reasons that are both political and deeply personal. So first, the political. In March of 2007, I left my life as a political journalist in New York and moved to Chicago to work for Barack Obama's presidential campaign. Thank you. At that time, there weren't many of us on the campaign, and the early polling suggested that the country was nowhere near ready to elect a black man with a middle name, Hussein. My job was to help build momentum for our grassroots movement by telling the personal stories of people from across the country who were in fact ready, not only to vote for Obama, but to make donations to him, knock on doors for him, and organize in their own communities. My official title was Chief Blogger, but I was known around the campaign as the narrator-in-chief of the Obama movement. And I have to say, it was a pretty cool job. I traveled the whole country talking to people from all races and of all walks of life. I met veterans, farmers, college students, working class folks from the Rust Belt, many of them former Republicans. Most of them had never been politically engaged at all until Obama came along. And it was thrilling to meet so many people who believed, as I did, in the vision of a united and reconciled America. It was also thrilling to see that our campaign strategy was actually working. The more we shared these stories of hope and change, the bigger our movement got and the more our campaign went from fantasy to reality. And then, of course, against all odds, Barack Hussein Obama was elected president. And while I never believed that America would become a post-racial country overnight, I felt confident that his victory signaled a sea change in American history. Then he became president, and the reality set in. The Tea Party movement was exploding across the country. Unarmed black men were getting stopped, frisked, and even shot by police officers. Donald Trump was gaining political traction, demanding to see Obama's birth certificate, which, by the way, on the campaign I actually held in my own hand, so it was real. Far from moving beyond a black America and a white America, a red America and a blue America, our country seemed more divided than it had since I could remember. I wondered if the campaign that had changed my life and so many other people's lives was just a blip, an aberration, if America was intractably divided. I knew the story of my country was far more complicated and contradictory than the one I'd been telling on the campaign. It was around this time that I realized I wanted to write a novel about race in America. As a journalist, I'd never written a word of fiction in my entire life. But I was inspired by a TV show me and many of my coworkers, including Obama himself, were big fans of during the campaign, The Wire, the HBO show. I was amazed by the way that show suddenly raised mass awareness about something journalists had been covering for years, the drug war, but which went largely ignored by the public until that show came out. I saw that there was immense power in fiction when done with sensitivity and intelligence to make people feel things. Gripping stories with great characters could get people to care about complex, critical issues in ways that facts and stats often couldn't. The novel I wanted to write would not be based on Obama, but drawn from material that was much more personal, something that happened years ago, but which shaped me profoundly, my year in 6th grade. I hope that by revisiting this formative period, by delving as deeply as I could into my own story, I might be able to understand my country a little bit better too. So a little bit about that real-life 6th grade experience. Sorry, that's not me tearing up, that's my contact lens. I grew up in Boston, a neighborhood that is now quite gentrified, but wasn't as much when I was a kid, called Jamaica Plain. My house was on a hill. On one side of the hill, there was a beautiful arboretum owned by Harvard University. And on the other side of the hill, there was a large public housing project, which I passed every day on my way home from the bus stop. My parents were radicals who came of age politically in the 1960s. I grew up going to folk music festivals and political rallies. They were college graduates and professionals, but they scorned materialism, refused to buy me and my brothers video games, and bought us clothes from secondhand stores. My dad had a garden and grew a fair amount of the food that we ate. We never got to go to McDonald's, which really ticked me off. They also believed strongly in public schools. In 1992, I lost the lottery to attend the good public middle school in Boston, and my parents sent me to their second choice, the Martin Luther King Middle School. As had been the case since kindergarten, I was one of a very few white kids in my school. But when I arrived at the King, I might as well have been the white kid. I had blonde, curly hair, a squeaky voice, and incredibly unfashionable secondhand clothes. I was mocked, bullied, I even had a knife pulled on me. But eventually I did make friends. At the time, I was pretty angry at my parents for not pulling me out of the King and putting me into a private school. But now I'm pretty glad that they didn't, for many reasons. But for one, of course, I couldn't have written this novel without that experience. This novel isn't just drawn from the feelings I experienced as an outsider in 6th grade. It's drawn from what I've learned about race, privilege, and inequality in the aftermath of that extraordinary year. So now let me finally tell you about the novel. Green is the story of a friendship between Dave Greenfeld, the awkward and anxious white boy at the fictional Martin Luther King Middle School in Boston, and Marlon Wellings, a nerdy but confident black kid Dave meets in school, who happens to live in the housing project down the block from Dave's house. Dave and Mar are both misfits in their own ways, failing to fit into the categories that society has assigned to them, and this is part of what makes their friendship so instant and electric. They're both obsessed with the deeply uncool Boston Celtics. Marlon even likes Larry Bird, who's seen by their peers as the whitest basketball player of all time. They spend their afternoons studying at the local library and plotting their way to Harvard and eventual millions when they aren't making goofy homemade videos with Dave's eccentric little brother. The drama of the book centers on whether or not the boys will make it out of the King and into Boston Latin, a prestigious exam school that sends more of its graduates to Harvard than any other high school in the United States. If they don't get into Latin, the boys fear they will have to go to one of the city's underfunded and violence-ridden public high schools, places from which they are warned many kids end up in jail or even dead. But the larger story arc of Green is about whether Dave and Mar's friendship can survive in the segregated and unequal world they live in. Can they remain loyal to each other in spite of the forces that threaten to pull them apart? Can they exist as equals in their relationship when one of them enjoys so many social advantages over the other? Is a deep and lasting friendship between a poor black kid and a privileged white kid even possible in America, or is it doomed from the start? If all of this sounds a little heavy, I promise you the book is also full of silliness, adolescent mischief, and wordplay. One of the most exciting aspects of writing this book for me was inventing a new language, one that brings together hip-hop slang and nerd vernacular. I was inspired by two of my favorite books, The Adventures of Huck Finn and The Brief, Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde by Junot Diaz, to try to create a humorous and uniquely American voice. And like those books, my narrator is a young adult. I had a lot of fun writing from this perspective because 12-year-olds are smart enough to have real insights about the people around them, but they aren't hardened enough to start thinking of life as boring and repetitive. They still have this wide-eyed, soft-hearted quality. They're not afraid to be enthusiastic or totally bummed about things. They also tend to be pretty histrionic about the changes that are happening in their lives. They think everything is a huge deal. They don't have a very good sense of proportion. So Dave is having all of these coming-of-age experiences, puberty, his first crush, his first encounters with violence, that feel so difficult and profound and consequential. Meanwhile, Marlon is experiencing stuff that's objectively much heavier and much more consequential. I thought about writing this book from a 35-year-old's perspective looking back, but I decided that if I'd written this book from a 35-year-old's perspective, the older Dave would have an adult-level knowledge all along of the difference between his struggles and Marlon's. When you're in the 12-year-old's mind, you get to watch him gradually awaken. Okay, that's enough about me and my book. And the last thing I want to say, to echo what others have said, is thank you to all of you. I wrote large chunks of this book in public libraries. And as I mentioned, there are many scenes in this book, or several scenes in this book, that take place in Dave's local library. Are there any Boston librarians here? From Boston. Okay. Sedgwick Street Library was my library. I spent a great deal of my youth at that library, Sedgwick Street, at the Boston Public main branch. And for me, these weren't just places to get books. They were sanctuaries. They were places that made me and my friends feel both safe and inspired. So thank you very much.